Sphere, Supreme Verdict, and Sphinx's Revelation. So a little more of a, I mean, this is a deck that's capable of playing to the board, too. It's not sitting on its heels the entire time. Can get draws like Sylvan Caryatid into Advent of the Worm, but at its heart, a control deck.
Tietze going to fire off with a Force into an Elvish Mystic. Lepore. Looks like he has a Temple of Plenty in his hand. He's going to play Temple of Enlightenment to begin. So it's time for Frank to scry. We'll see where that top card's going to go. It looks like it's going to go to the bottom of the deck. He'll pass the turn back over to Tietze, who will take a draw here in just a moment. And we'll see exactly how Max wants to do things. Two-time Open Series champion here. Also an invitational champion.
Yeah, quite a resume.
He wins a lot. And there's the Sylvan Caryatid. Going to pass the turn back over to Lepore. Lepore picks up a copy of Sylvan Caryatid. He's going to play that and then pass the turn back.
And now some alarms are probably going off in Max's head right now because this is an opening. Maybe you can just put Frank on ban control here based on this start, but this is not a conventional opening you see much of in Standard.
Yeah, not at all. We really don't see ban strategies. Again, you mentioned how some people play blue-white control, splashing green for Kiora and Mistcutter. That's about the closest we've gotten for some time now.
And now you have to ask yourself, does he have Supreme Verdict in his list? You know, you see Sylvan Caryatid here. Maybe you'd assume that he does not have Supreme Verdict. Frank, in fact, has 4 copies in his list.
Well, he can make a really safe play and just play a copy of Xenagos, make a Satyr token, push through pointing damage with the Elvish Mystic, because you have to assume the Satyr token will be blocked and just kind of go from there.
It's the best of both worlds. A little bit of a hedge. Gets to advance this board without completely caving to a Supreme Verdict here.
And there is your attack. Going to block the 2/2, take 1. Lepore going to go down to 19. He will untap and take a draw. A copy of Supreme Verdict is what he has found. Temple of Plenty. Lepore going to leave his top card on top. Follow this up with a Banished Knight to take care of Xenagos.
Really good start here from Frank, and a lot of power left over in his hand. You see a hand with Kiora, Elspeth, and Supreme Verdict.
Here's an attack from Tietze. He's going to put Lepore down to 16. Let's see what the follow-up's going to be. It's going to be a Temple of Abandon to begin. Top card is going to go to the bottom. Does Tietze have a play here? I have to imagine he does. He's got the 4 mana. It's a sweet spot to be in between Pulachronos, Rampager, and Domri. You have to imagine he's got something to do.
But again, are you worried about the possibility of Supreme Verdict?
Just a Sylvan Caryatid, nothing all that impressive. And that is a Plains. Will it be a Verdict that Lepore does play?
That seems like a great spot to play Kiora.
Oh, well, Kiora it is. That's going to come into play. It's going to shut down the old Satyr token.
Max completely lacks the capacity to attack this Kiora unless he's able to find something like Stormbreath Dragon, and then the Supreme Verdict in Frank's hand gets even juicier, so it's a great spot.
Blood Crypt here from Tietze. That's going to do it. Kiora's going to tick up. There's a Plains. This is an Elspeth. This is a pretty good spot to be in if you're Frank.
And keep in mind, Frank is doing this with Supreme Verdict still left in his hand as an incredible insurance policy. So just a great curve here from Frank, and Max without much game at all.
4 mana. Yeah, there's Xenagos. Xenagos is the worst of the Planeswalkers on the table. By a lot. So that's going to come and make a Satyr token.
Just low impact given how much power Frank has in play right now.
Yeah, I mean, there are 3 Planeswalkers on the table, and Max far and away has the worst one.
Yeah.
And truthfully, not that great of a draw. He hasn't played a monster, which is a weird thing to say, but it's just true.
Yeah, nothing big thus far.
Yeah. He hasn't played a Rampager, he hasn't played a Stormbreath Dragon, he hasn't played a copy of Pulachronos. None of the above.
Is Frank going to be able to get an Elspeth emblem in play with Krakens is now my question.
Are we talking about flying Krakens?
Possibly.
That's a flavor fail, right?
Well, once you have multiple cards in play, then you accept that there's going to be some weirdness. Riverbow and Bone Splitter that's been going on for ages. There's all sorts of examples of that. It's the single ones like Elephant Ambush where I raise an eyebrow.
Okay. Gotcha. Another Satyr token here. I suppose a card like Mizzium Mortars would still be pretty good right now if Tietze had it, but he doesn't. And, we talked about the Supreme Verdict that Frank has just not had to cast at all. But, I mean, Supreme Verdict would be absurd right now on this board. There's your ultimate for Kiora. So a Kiora emblem is incoming.
And we got a Kraken here somewhere.
Yeah, there will be a Kraken coming in a moment.
It's great for Frank to be able to conceal this information. That's the best part.
I would agree. for future games.
Yeah.
Or you have no idea the Supreme Verdict's actually in his deck. Because, he looks like a Bant mid-rangey deck that just plays Planeswalkers. That's cool. And that's what he's doing. He's going to attack here with some Soldier tokens. He might actually, this feels like the turn where he might just fire off the Verdict, right? Where he's attacking with these tokens. And also, that's not necessarily true. Like, he might just be trying to, maybe force a couple points of damage because he knows that, okay, I'm just going to make 4 soldiers anyway. But I could very easily see this attack take place, him cast a Verdict, make 3 1/1s, get my Kraken, and then there's no way Max can come back.
Well, I think that's likely to be the play here from Frank. I still feel like I would have preferred to just, go ahead, plus your Elspeth, make your emblem, say go. Just try not to reveal Supreme Verdict. Frank's at a very healthy 16 life. It's not like he's in any risk of, Storm Breath coming off the top and killing him out of nowhere. So, and the ability to conceal the Supreme Verdict to me feels more important than the edge he gets off of the Supreme Verdict.
Yeah. Now, if Max knows that he has Verdict in his deck, I think that's a different story. But if Max doesn't know there's a Verdict there, then I agree with you. I think concealing the information is certainly very important here. Either way, Verdict is going to get cast. You're going to see a Courser and 3 Elspeth tokens are going to come into play. The top card of the deck right now is a mystery because it's off the screen. We'll try to get that fixed for you guys there. And then a Kraken token is going to come into play. So I think Tietze is going to draw his card and probably concede in just a moment here. So I don't think there's any coming back here for Frank. Or excuse me, for Max.
Yeah. Now, maybe these players were sitting next to each other. Maybe Max is already aware of the presence of the Supreme Verdict in Frank's list here, but it felt like that could have potentially been concealed for at least one more game.
Either way, Frank Lepore is going to win game number 1 over Maxwell Tietze. Bant Control up a game over Judd Monsters. We'll take a look at Judd Monsters' sideboard. I'll begin here with 2 copies of Mizium Mortars, 4 Mistcutter Hydra, 2 Putrefy, 2 Golgari Charm, 2 Rakdos' Return, a Chandra Power Master, a Vask of the Unseen, and an Ultimate Price. So he's playing against, this Planeswalker-heavy strategy. Rakdos' Return seems like it's at its best here.
Absolutely. The Planeswalkers as well seem very good to me, and Mistcutter Hydra too.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, some really good options here for Max, and a decent amount of cards to sideboard out. Take a look at Frank's side. I know you have that in front of you.
A DSI, 2 copies of Dispel, a Jace Memory Adept, 2 copies of Last Breath, 3 copies of Mistcutter Hydra, 2 Negates, 3 copies of Nyx Fleece Ram, and a Rest in Peace. There's not a whole lot here that excites me. I mean, the Negates are fine. You're fighting over Planeswalkers and such, but Frank doesn't have a lot to bring to the table, and that's a function of playing Bant as opposed to Esper or some other base black deck. Normally you see Doomblades and Ultimate Prices and such. Frank has no access to those kind of cards, and so he's a little light on action for this matchup.
Do you think it's favorable for him or no?
I think so. I think his base strategy is very effective here. He has a lot of good one-for-one answers to Max's large threats. The total sum of Planeswalkers, I think, is pretty tough on Max as well. And 4 copies of Supreme Verdict is in the list. So I think the structure of Frank's deck is good for the matchup, but he has very little in the sideboard to bring in.
We'll see how things do break. I mean, Judd Monsters obviously still a very, very powerful deck. Tietze sitting at 4-1 with the deck, but he was definitely overwhelmed that game. Just not a very good draw. I mean, got off to a good start, but nothing really materialized after those opening turns.
Yeah. Had all the Mana Accelerator, has all the makings of the good start there. When you see turn 1 Elvish Mystic, turn 2 Scryland, Caryatid, you're bracing yourself for Stormbreath Dragons and Sea of Planeswalkers and Palakranos and such. And Max really had nothing besides the Xenagos, which was low impact compared to the swarm of Planeswalkers Frank was able to bring to the table.
So both players do finish sideboarding. We'll be underway here in just a moment. If you are just joining us, Cedric Phillips, Patrick Sullivan, Star City Games Open Series here in Providence, Rhode Island at SCG Live. Hashtag SCGPROV for your tweets all weekend long. We've got our devices in front of us. You guys can definitely get at us, via Twitter. But of course, the most important thing here after this tournament, Season 2 Invitational next weekend in Columbus.
Again, it comes so fast.
I know. It feels like we did the Season 1 Invitational 2 weeks ago or whatever in Charlotte. Yeah. I remember wrapping that up with Michael Majors winning an insane match with Blue White Red Delver to win the Legacy Open.
At 2 in the morning did that finally wrap up?
Roughly 2-ish when we got done there in Charlotte. Crowned the Invitational champion, Derek Sheets, winning an awesome 5-game set with Esper Deathblade over Jesse Hefner, playing Rug Delver. It does not feel like it was that long ago.
And some great matches.
Yeah, just over the course of the weekend. It was a lot of fun. Brian Bronwyn getting out to like that, he started 10-0 and then lost 5 matches in a row or something.
He was, I believe, was undefeated after day 1 at the minimum. And maybe
I know he was undefeated after day 1.
And then basically lost out from a pretty insane spot.
Yeah.
And the Invitationals, it's 16 rounds, and there's maybe 300, 350, 400 players in the room, what have you. We're not talking like you need to go. It's not a Grand Prix where you need to go 13 1-1 to make the elimination rounds or what have you. It's usually 12-4 or 12-3-1 is good. So Brian was in. I mean, it had to be a full collapse for him to miss the elimination rounds there.
I'm almost positive it was a 10-0 start, and then he just could not get a win together for the rest of the weekend. And it was tough to take for him, but he was able to, bounce back, still qualified for the Players' Championship since he led Season 1 in Open Series points. But, when you start off a tournament that well, of course you want to close it out.
Of course. I mean, the Invitational is a huge purse.
Yeah.
It's a prestigious event. You want to win those things.
Next weekend we'll have another. We'll be punching 2 tickets to the Players' Championship. One halfway punched for Chris Van Meter. But the second one is certainly up for grabs at our Season 2 Invitational. And I'll tell you one thing. There's a player to be scared of that weekend. That's Jerry Thompson coming back to play.
I know.
You're excited, because I am too.
I am too.
It's his first tournament back.
It feels, all right, you kids got to have fun for a little while. Jerry T up in Renton, and now it's a reckoning.
6 Invitational top 8s, 2 wins. See both players going to play Sylvan Carrington to start off here.
And if you had to multiply, ability to play Magic by ability to build Magic decks, Jerry T is on the short list of players on Earth.
Yeah.
So it's exciting to have him back.
Pulacranos turn number 3 here for Tietze. Lepore going to take 2 from the Temple Garden. Looks like he's going to play a Kiora and shut down that Hydra. Kiora is just so underplayed in Standard to me for how powerful it is. It was really good at the Block Pro Tour. It seems like it should be better in Standard. Maybe there's just waiting for a rotation or some more help. But
it's just tough to justify playing green alongside blue and white when arguably, almost certainly black and arguably even red bring more options to the table.
Sure.
But Kiora is no shortage of power.
Temple of Abandon here for Tietze. Top card stays on top very, very quickly. The follow-up is a copy of Xenagos. That's going to come into play. Make a Satyr token. Put Kiora down to 1. Pass the turn back over to Lepore. Take a draw. It's an island. That's going to take up. Shut down Pulacranos. You see Lepore's hand. He's got a lot of lands over there. Looks like he's going to play Sylvan Carrington right now. Play Breeding Pool tapped and just pass the turn over to Tietze, who will untap and take a draw. Again, he kept this card on top very, very quickly. He's going to make another Satyr token. Could be a Gore-Clan Rampager hanging out in the grip here. We don't know.
Well, even activating the Mutavault takes care of the Kiora here. He's willing to send both the Satyrs and his Mutavault. So Max may be able to slog through this Kiora ultimately.
You know what? Reaching for the lands. Looks like he may activate. Yes. Attack step. We're going after Kiora.
He still has to respect the possibility of removal spells in Frank's deck. I mean, you could very easily imagine him casting Azorius Charm in the spot. And
Last breath, too.
Yeah. Full disaster, but
Tietze reaching for some mana, kind of slowing down now. Not sure if he wants to add anything else to the board because he saw Supreme Verdict in game number 1. He's going to go with a Courser. Here's the top card. It's a copy of Pulacranos.
And I like playing the Courser this turn. If Frank had Supreme Verdict, there's a really good chance he would have just done it last turn.
There's a Blood Grip tapped, gain a life, just simply pass the turn back to Lepore, who will take a draw. Another copy of Kiora. The last one wasn't that great. Can't imagine that this one will be either. However, the Elspeth in Frank's hand is pretty good.
It's a good spot.
That's because it's Elspeth.
But
we could see Rev. Maybe.
Yeah, I think Revelations is actually the route I would go here, just because Elspeth's very likely to just die into the face of the Pulacranos and all the attackers that Max has access to at this point. And it's really hard to lose this game if you win this game, I think, just if you lose this Elspeth for essentially nothing. But you can rev, and then hopefully you find some mixture of Supreme Verdict, Detention Spheres, and what have you, and try to take the game over from there. Looks like Frank's drawing the same conclusion.
Tietze draws Pulacranos. Top card is Pulacranos. How much does he want to extend into the board now? Of course, redundant copies of the Hydra don't matter very much, but we'll see what else is heading out in his hand. Gonna add another Satyr token to the table from Xenagos. Maybe even fire from Mutavault and just keep attacking this way, because it doesn't really need to add much to his board. His board's already pretty good.
No, it's pretty advanced right now, and he has insurance against Elspeth, potentially with the Pulacranos in play as well, so. Does not need to do much beyond what he's already doing. Now the question is, does he believe that Frank has Sphinx's Revelation in his deck as well? Because if he does, then he probably needs to try to maximize the amount of pressure he's adding to the table.
It would be pretty insane if Frank had a card like Fated Retribution right now.
Yeah.
Now, that's not there, but it would be pretty absurd if he did. You can see the blocks that are going to take place here. Some damage is going to come across. We're going to see Revelation here in just a moment. But 2, 4, 6, and 5 is 11. Tietze is going to play a Stomping Ground tapped. He's going to gain a life because of the Courser. And there's a Rev. It'll be for 4. 4 life, which is important, but 4 cards, much more important. Feels like Lepore is looking for a Supreme Verdict right now.
It's a little rough because of, Frank losing a lot of his mana potentially with the Caryatids. It feels like it needs to be a mixture of Detention Sphere. You see him draw Advent of the Worm, and that's also a very good draw here for Frank. Banishing Light plus Advent of the Worm does a lot of work here as well. And this is another card where, is this even on Max's radar that Frank could have something like Advent in his deck?
Yeah, you see the D-Sphere being rough for. The question is, what do you D-Sphere in this situation? You don't love the idea of D-Sphering, the Satyr token. Jay, you'll take care of 3, but you're not taking care of something like permanently, like a Xenagos or a Pulachronos. And again, taking care of Pulachronos doesn't do very much when your opponent has 1 in their hand and 1 on top of their deck. So tough to say exactly what the best line of play is here for Frank.
I don't think it can be Pulachronos for the reason you just mentioned. Frank is aware that Max has more copies left over. So it feels like you kind of make your deal with the devil there. And with Cure in hand, too, Frank has a lot of ways to blunt the Pulachronos going forward. So I feel like it has to be either the Xenagos or the Satyr tokens, depending on how much immediate pressure Frank feels like he's under right now. This is a very tough turn, though.
Yeah, looks like we're reaching towards the Sphere. I'm going to start with the Temple. Looks like that top card's going to go to the bottom. So here's 3 mana. And there's a Sphere. Looks like he's going to take care of Pulachronos. A little surprised by that decision.
Well, maybe this is just a tempo play. Maybe he's assuming that the Advent catches him up big time.
It's got a lot of work to do if that's the case.
Yeah. It's a tough turn.
Top card here. Temple of Abandon for Tietze.
Players, your pairings for round 1 are on their way.
See how he wants to start his turn.
And if you're Max here, now what are you playing around?
Yeah.
Because the Detention Sphere, if you knew that Frank had Detention Sphere in his hand and you had to guess what he would target, I think you would guess either Xenagos or the Satyr tokens. It being Pulachronos when he knows that you have extra copies is really perplexing. It's a tough turn.
You can see Tietze is going to take his time trying to figure out this turn. He's a pretty deliberate player anyway, but now you have to kind of, work your way through the puzzle.
Yeah.
Of what can my opponent have in this situation. I'm going to start with the Temple of Abandon, make sure he gets his value off of Coursers. The card he's looking at is a Domri now. He'll figure out where he wants to scry that top or the bottom. Looks like he's going to leave that on top because he's already reaching towards his mana. This could be Stormbreath Dragon territory, potentially. Again, Tietze hasn't had to commit anything to the board recently because he was so far ahead. But we know he has 2 copies of Pulachronos in his hand, so. And this is 5 mana that's being tapped, so this feels like it might be a dragon in the sky. And that's exactly what it is. Gonna add some mana here. Gonna fire up a Mutavault. He hasn't used Xenagos just yet, but it looks like he might make some mana here. You count the creatures that are on the table. Yeah, that's a lot of that.
Cuts it up to go monstrous.
Yeah, that's exactly 7. That'll probably hurt, to say the least. Frank might have a response with Advent of the Worm. I'm not sure it's going to matter, though. Monstrosity activation, I think he's got 6 cards. So let's say, cast Advent of the Worm, that's 5, puts him down to 6. That's a lethal dragon all by itself. That's not even counting the other creatures that are in play.
This is another spot where I'm not showing anything.
Yeah.
You cast Advent and still die by a lot, so don't even bother showing it.
Yep. You win the game. That's exactly what Maxwell Tietze does. We're tied up here 1-1 between Jund Monsters and Bank Control.
And Frank's list, not really a lot of answers to Planeswalkers. There are 2 Banishing Lights and 3 copies of Detention Sphere. Not a lot going on in the sideboard. If he's brought in the negates, that's extra stuff, but it's not clear he brought them in. And his deck's not very good at pressuring Planeswalkers because he's playing basically just Planeswalkers himself. So those kind of draws can be really challenging. Now, he is very well equipped to handle Xenagos because he has a lot of good blockers. He has 4 Caryatids and 4 Coursers. But I think Domri especially has the potential to cause him all sorts of fits. And even that game, Xenagos was good and Frank had 2 copies of Sylvan Caryatid.
Yeah. Xenagos has been an interesting card for me during its lifespan. When I was working on Jund Monsters at the beginning back in February, I cut that card immediately for Reaper of the Wilds, and I actually just cut that card for anything. So I didn't think it was very good.
Yeah.
It just felt very underwhelming to me. Like, the mana ability you don't use very often, and who cares about a 2/2 haste creature? And I can say, watching Chris Van Meter and many other people play either Red-Green Monsters or Jund Monsters over the course of the past couple of months was just simply wrong.
It's another angle of attack. It's a way to advance your board without playing further into Supreme Verdict. And there's some, even I've had experiences playing beatdown decks where Zendikos cranking out 2/2 every turn is part of a game plan to lock down the ground.
Yeah. It's really, really just an interesting card because, again, I don't think that, individual things that it does aren't all that impressive. I mean, sometimes the 2/2 is good, but, it's all about the applications in the format. The card happens to be very good against mono black, which is one of the best cards because it slows down Desecration Demon. It's a constant source of damage or creatures, which is very, very important. The mana it can generate. Nothing else in the format can really do what Zendikos just did on that turn of the game. So it's much better than I think I gave it credit for. Sure, the ultimate doesn't matter very much, but the first 2 lines of text actually do seem to matter, and a lot more than I initially gave it credit for.
Mono black is an interesting case study to me because there's a lot of times where people say 2-for-1s, but they aren't really 2-for-1s because the card that you have left over, or the extra thing you're up, isn't an impactful thing. But against Mono Black Devotion, all your 2-for-1s are, generally speaking, impactful because they're just trying to kill all of your stuff. So even though Zendikos gets hit with a Hero's Downfall and you have your 2/2 left over, there's a lot of matchups where, against something like Esper, that's not really a 2-for-1 because how much is your 2/2 worth over time? Against Mono Black Devotion, the 2/2 is really important. So Zendikos does a lot of work in that matchup.
We're going to watch game 3 here between Ban Control and Jund Monsters. I think this game, the most important card probably, and the most important turn is probably turn 2 for Frank in this game, and if he has the Sylvan Caryatid or not. If he has the acceleration and be able to get to those Planeswalkers and Advent of the Worm like we saw in game 1, we're looking at a much different deck than without it.
Or does he have Supreme Verdict and some way to answer a Planeswalker?
Yeah.
That's the other type of draw he can get that's very problematic for Max.
So we're going to watch game 3 here in just a moment. Again, Frank Lepore will be on the play. Takes a look at his opening. You can see a Banished Light and a couple of lands there thus far. You see an Advent of the Worm as well. Wonder how good the mana is. Supreme Verdict 2. Also looks like a Mana Confluence. More importantly, there is a Sylvan Caryatid there, so that'll tie the room together. You see Lepore is going to keep. Tietze going to take a look at his hand. He says, I will not.
And
so he's going to go down to 6.
The Advent's really important for Frank in this matchup too, it feels like, because that's his most reliable way of attacking a Planeswalker.
He's got exactly what you mentioned, which is acceleration and ways to handle a Planeswalker between Advent of the Worm attacking it or Banishing Light just taking care of it.
What's really interesting about Frank's deck too is he gets draws like this, let's say, where he doesn't really want to care about the Supreme Verdict that's in his hand because he has enough, front forward ways to advance his game plan and just accelerate into Planeswalkers. Max has to play the entire game playing around the presence of Supreme Verdict. So Frank's deck allows him a lot of different paths for the way that he wants to play the game, even if he wants to ignore Supreme Verdict altogether, or he doesn't draw it, or what have you. But Max has to play around it the whole time.
So down to 6 goes Tietze. Again, he'll be on the draw here. Was not happy with what he found. We'll see if he can find something a little bit better this go around for the former Invitational champion. He's happy enough, so game 3 underway here between Lepore and Tietze. Just a forest here for Lepore. For Tietze, he's going to go down to 18 and play an Elvish Mystic, so acceleration certainly important now.
Absolutely.
Lepore trying to figure out what land play is going to go with the forest play. Sylvan Caryatid, kick it back over to Tietze, who will take a draw here. See if he has a Planeswalker or anything of the sort. He did draw a copy of Mistcutter Hydra for the turn.
And this is one of those spots where I think Frank was trying to determine whether or not he wanted to hold the Caryatid and just play the game for Supreme Verdict, but he's so far away, both in terms of raw mana and colored mana, from being able to cast Supreme Verdict, that he has to ignore it for the time being.
Temple of Abandon, the play here for Tietze. He's going to consult the hand as he does scry. Going to leave that card, it looks like, on top of the deck. And do we have a follow-up? More acceleration, perhaps.
And if Frank's willing to commit this Caryatid to the table, especially when his opening draw is Forest, then I think Max is going to be much more inclined to not play around Supreme Verdict.
Another Elvish Mystic before passing the turn back. Mana Confluence, the land here for Lepore. You saw him draw a gate for the turn. He's just going to pass the turn back here. And again, don't forget, Tietze has not seen Advent of the Worm yet. So this could really take him by surprise.
For sure. I mean, if he says land Mistcutter Hydra for 4, this could be a real fast game.
Yep. He does have a land. It's a Blood Crypt. Wow, this could be a complete blowout if that's the case. What is Tietze going to do here? Can he sniff this out?
This is a huge turn.
Yeah. There's a Blood Crypt. That feels like step 1 towards Mistcutter. There's also a Storm Breath in hand. I'm really curious to see which one. This is 5 mana. There's Mistcutter Hydra for 4. And he's going to attack. Yep, that is going to eat that alive. Lepore will have to take 1 and do it, but I'm sure he doesn't mind. He's going to destroy that Mistcutter Hydra, and you mentioned that can turn the game around in a big way, and chances are that's exactly what it's going to do.
And you can't blame Max for not being able to sniff that one out because that's really hard, but he's in a ton of trouble now.
And part of the reason it's difficult to sniff out is because, one, it doesn't even look like he can cast it for the most part, but the other one, too, is just Admiral of the Worm isn't this widely played card, even though it's ridiculously powerful. It's this card that really doesn't have much of a home, and if you consider the way that the initial game is played out, Planeswalkers and Ravs and all this other stuff, you didn't see Admiral of the Worm, so it just makes sense that he wouldn't play around that kind of a card. Now he's in a lot of trouble because of it, because not only does he lose his entire turn, which, by the way, he took 2 to cast that Mistcutter Hydra, now he's being attacked for 5, and now all of a sudden he's under the gun.
Yeah, there's all sorts of cascading consequences here for Max.
Here's 5 mana. There's a Stormbreath Dragon. That's going to resolve. You got to imagine Tietze's probably got to keep attacking now. Holding back on defense doesn't do all that much. One thing, too, about this Jund Monsters deck, as good and as versatile as this deck is, it actually has a problem dealing with dealing with a 5/5 like this.
Yeah, he has, and Max's list is actually playing Mizzy-Mors. He doesn't even have Abrupt Decay in his main deck, too.
He's got 3 Dreadbore, which you have to imagine he left in because of the Planeswalkers he saw. But outside of that, I mean, this is actually a really difficult card for him to be able to deal with. You see his hand right now. He's got cards like Xenagos and things of that nature, but unfortunately for Tietze, Admiral of the Worm has Trample, so that doesn't even matter all that much.
And keep in mind, Frank still has the negate in all of this, too. So there's a lot of draws that Max has. The Dreadbore you just alluded to, a Planeswalker, which also does not work.
Roam Tomb going to knock Tietze down to 9. There's an Elvish Mystic. Yeah, this looks like an attempt to double block. Lepore's going to draw a card. There's a Plains. And there's a Banishing Light. So even though Banishing Light on Elvish Mystic isn't the most appealing play, it allows Admiral of the Worm to keep on trucking.
Max loudly stated for the record last turn, I'm looking to double block. So as you mentioned, this is not the most impressive looking thing, but given that Max has announced this is his game plan, it makes a lot of sense.
Tietze going to draw a card for the turn. It looks like with Tietze, in a perfect world, Tietze, if he draws a land, he's doing great because then he can Monstrosity the Stormbreath Dragon and beat the Admiral of the Worm in combat.
Yeah.
Now, that's not where we're at right now, of course, and the double block play is still available with a Dragon and an Elf in the following turn, but, a lot of Max's turns have been blown up here by Lepore.
Yeah. And it's just this weird mixture of cards, you can see it's just a lot to play around, and the Advent especially clearly came out of left field. I mean, Max would have played this game in an entirely different way if that card was on his radar.
We could have very easily seen that turn. Play Mistcutter Hydra before go.
Yeah,
just pass.
Play Stormbreath Dragon, attack you.
Yeah. But Advent of the Worm, a card that was not on Tietze's radar at all, just see him play a land there. That's what caused all of this.
Yeah, and it makes sense why Max played it that way, too, because he still, with the Mistcutter play, has to respect the possibility of Supreme Verdict, so he wants to lead with the card that diminishes in quality if all of his mana creatures get blown up. And Stormbreath Dragon is just kind of higher individual card quality anyway, but the way it worked out was clearly a disaster.
Inside the draw step, Tietze is going to activate Stormbreath Dragon. It'll cause Lepore to take 5 points of damage. Lepore is going to play a Temple. See, he's going to scry the top card to the bottom here. His hand right now, double Supreme Verdict, a Sphinx's Revelation, and Negate. The thing about that particular hand is it carves out a different path of this game.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that is interesting about Lepore's deck, is it has kind of an identity crisis. It can play an aggressive deck. It can play a mid-rangey card advantage deck, and there are times when it can play a much longer game.
And if I'm Frank right now, I'm just sitting on my heels here. Maybe revving for 2, maybe just doing nothing. If he Supreme Verdicts, he loses Negate back up, and he opens himself to all sorts of payback from Max the following turn.
Oh, here's a card that's negatable. Then it goes. That gets countered right away. Doesn't even think twice about that, does Lepore.
So yeah, I like the way that Frank's played this here. He still has the Supreme Verdicts in his hand in case something disastrous happens. And if Max doesn't do anything threatening next turn, that opens up the window for Frank to just rev for 3.
How do you like an attack for 7? 2-turn clock forces Verdict.
Does force Verdict, although it does mean he dies to Detention Sphere.
Mm-hmm. Dies to Banishing Light, too.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting.
Oh, it's in play.
I mean, like, Tietze, we saw him cast Xenagos. There's an Overgrown Tube. Like, he doesn't have anything. That's his last card. So you can kind of force your opponent's hand a little bit.
I think that I like an attack there because it's just, Frank's been missing land drops. He's got 3, now 4 cards in his hand. What are you beating from here if the game goes on for a few more turns?
Yeah.
You attack, maybe his hand randomly can't handle the Storm Breath, and you win the game.
Banishing Light to draw. Lepore just going to pass the turn back now. Tietze draws his card for the turn. I mean, it's kind of an unorthodox attack. It's a little bit crazy, and you also think about it. The Banishing Light that Lepore drew would have won him the game that turn. He's made the play that I suggested. But, no, it's all about playing to win. And, I think the Tietze is just in a world of trouble. He's going to play that Stomping Ground, pass the turn back. Lepore's going to Revelate for 3. So 3 more cards, 3 life. Lepore's going to go up to 17. Elspeth was among the cards that he drew here. Now, Elspeth is okay in this situation. The minus ability would actually kill the Worm token and the Dragon.
But even just making 3 tokens here is plenty powerful.
Yes.
And Frank can't afford to attack the Elspeth with a Stormbreath Dragon because he needs that Stormbreath Dragon to block.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you signed up for Commander
course, sir.
Class 3, your event is now ready for you. Please make your way to the side of it.
That'll be a Temple of Enlightenment, so the trigger's going to go on here.
So a ton of resources here for Frank to work with. Can't quite deal with the Stormbreath Dragon that's yet, but you're getting the feeling the game's getting to a point where it doesn't even matter. And again, Supreme Verdict has the ultimate insurance policy in case something goes haywire.
Yeah, Supreme Verdict seems kind of wonky in this deck, but at the same time, I think you mentioned it best. It's the ultimate insurance policy. In case anything goes bad as Blood Crypt now, another land here for Tietze to pass the turn back. He's kind of at the mercy of Lepore right now. He draws a copy of Breeding Pool. The top card is a Cyclonic Rift.
That's also fine. 1 copy of that in Frank's list, and
Yep.
that'll get the job from here as well.
Overload is an option. An overload to get the game over with. Breeding Pool going to come in. Lepore going to go up to 18. He just needs to make sure that nothing goes wrong now. He's going to take a damage. Going to go down to 16.
Yeah, and almost no way, Max can't really get out of this. No flesh blood weirdness or anything of the sort in his list, so.
Yeah, that's the kind of card it would take right now, right?
Something totally bizarre.
Maybe a Bonfire of the Damned. Even though that's not possible. Mizzium Mortars wouldn't even be all that good.
Yeah, the problem here now with Cyclonic Rift is, if Max drew a removal spell for the Worm, then the rest of Frank's attackers still win the game.
Mm-hmm.
And if Max drew a creature, that doesn't matter because, it all gets swept up by the Rift. So
Yeah. The writing is effectively on the wall
yeah.
because that top card is Cyclonic Rift. Tietze is going to take a moment here to see if there's anything he can do to get himself out of this situation. You just see him reaching for the Stormbreath Dragon, figuring out where it wants to go. Doesn't want to go after Elspeth. Doesn't want to go after Lepore's life total. It's going to take care of the Planeswalker. The follow-up play is going to be a Gore-Clan Rampager, passing the turn back. Lepore's top card is Sphinx of Revelation. He says, I'm going to overload this, and Max Tietze says that is going to do it. Frank Lepore is going to win this match over Max Tietze, 2-1. Bant control, 5-1 here in Providence.
Sweet deck, and, again, that was... that third game was a testament to all the stuff we were talking about over the course of the entire match, where the variety and the variety of cards and the wide range of effects that Franks has access to is a challenge to play around.
Yep.
Are you going to slow play your threats? Well, then you can get buried just by Advent and Elspeth and Cyclonic Rift playing this tempo game. If you curve out, you're always worried about the threat of Supreme Verdict. If you play a slow game, you just lose to Sphinx's Revelation. And again, that Advent of the Worm clearly wasn't even close to being on Max's radar in that third game. So, you know, there's one thing where you look at the deck list and you see the pros and cons of what a deck can do and all that kind of stuff. It's easy to lose in the shuffle of all that versatility and flexibility and unexpectedness, and Frank's deck has that in spades.
Yeah, you know, it's really crazy. The card that I think of most in Standard as far as undercard plays go, underplayed cards, excuse me, I think of a lot of Izzet cards.
Yeah.
Is it Charm? Is it Static Caster? Karanos got